So I'm just going to turn it over to you, Perry, and I'm just going to sit back and enjoy the interview. Is that okay with you?
That sounds good.
Awesome.
Assemblyman Acosta, thank you again for coming in the studio. Appreciate your time.
Thanks,
you guys are taking up some bills that have moved out of their house of origin and, sending stuff on to the Senate. I want to talk to you about what's going on. First off, let's go some general stuff. Transportation.
You bet.
What's going on with the gas tax, with the freeways, with roads? What can we tell? The high-speed rail, right? That's getting built tomorrow?
That'll be ready. I think it's Tuesday in time for 4th of July.
Tuesday.
Yeah,
Okay,
it'll
cool.
be ready.
Perfect.
So you'll be able to whisk around the state. That's a great topic to start with because SB1, the gas tax measure that came out of the Senate, was very controversial. It continues to be. There was just a poll released, and 78% of Californians are either strongly opposed or opposed to the gas tax. And I think partly because the state has a terrible track record of due diligence and good fiscal management with the money that we already give them. And that was what my opposition was to the bill. When I spoke out at on the floor against the bill, it was primarily because we have not been good stewards of the money we already give the state. They're already absconding with the money and putting it in other purposes.
Well, let me ask you this. Does this bill then not specifically enough direct the funds for you? Is it just not, there's not enough accountability? Is that what you're saying?
Oh, very much so. As a matter of fact, 1/3 of the new $5.2 billion per year and an escalator built in doesn't even go to transportation projects. It goes to other things, some of them laudable, parks, workforce development, etc. Bike paths and things that sound great, but it's not directly related to transportation, and that's one of the issues. And we asked for constitutional protections for the money, particularly the truck weight fees that are a lot of money, and we asked for that money to go specifically to road projects and actually adding capacity. Right. Keep in mind, folks, this bill does not add any capacity to help you on the 405 where I just came from the San Fernando Valley, and it does nothing for that. We might get a few potholes fixed. I'm not confident.
Okay, well, I'm hopeful for at least a couple potholes then.
We'll get a couple potholes fixed. There you go.
$5 billion. So talk to me also about, I know another issue, I haven't heard much about it lately. I'm just wondering if there's any updates we can give about the CEMEX situation and the legislation we've heard. Has there been movement there in Sacramento?
Well, there's been some. We're in the process of kind of waiting to see what happens on the federal level. There's still some things that need to be worked out there in terms of the appeals and things that are happening. But we're working on it, and I assure you that neither Senator Wilk or myself or the other stakeholders are going to rest until that is put to rest, and we don't have those 1,000 trucks a day on our freeways. And
there's last thing on the general stuff before we get into some of the issues you've been really working on. We just talked about the CEMEX. Sorry, the water, the Bay Delta transport. I almost blanked on it. The Bay Delta transportation. We got good news on that. If you're an advocate of that project, which is the twin tunnels, I wanted to know where you stand on that, and also Wilkes water bill. It's right now it's going to the Assembly, which is your area, SB 634. Talk to me about those two pieces of information.
Sure. Well, I'll start with the former. That's the Bay Tunnels.
Are you in favor of that?
I think so. I think on the whole, we need to make sure that we have some way of mitigating any future risks, and I think that's a good way to do it. There's a lot of stakeholders that are involved in that. I'm also a big proponent. I just came back. I'm vice chair of the Natural Resources Committee, which deals with all these issues, water, etc. And I just came back recently from a tour of the site reservoir up in the kind of Northern California area.
What was your takeaway from that?
It's fabulous. It really is an amazing site because it's a natural bowl, and there's no creek through it, so they're going to pipe water from 2 miles away from the Sacramento River when it's at high flows. But that's a great piece of infrastructure as well. And then locally with the water bill, if you will, to merge the Castaic Lake Water Agency to create a new agency with the Newhall County, that's moving forward, and we should have it on the floor because it did just pass the committee, Water Parks and Wildlife, with a unanimous vote.
Unanimously, I believe. Yeah. Okay. Right on. And then more recently, I know you've been big on fiscal prudency and talking about what's going on with the University of California. I've heard a couple different takes on it, and my understanding is that the most recent action was you calling for an audit panel to kind of really look into the university Office of the Presidents.
Yes, specifically the Office of the President.
For the University of California. Can you talk to me about that process?
Sure. Well, I'll start with saying the obvious. The University of California is the crown jewel of our state, if not our nation, and it's the envy of the world in a lot of cases. Wonderful campuses and education, but specifically an audit that was ordered. I serve on the Joint Legislative Audit Committee, which is made up of senators and assembly members.
Right.
And that committee ordered an audit of the Office of the President and found $175 million of previously undisclosed funds. So there was a $175 million slush fund, if you will. Now, the Office of the President did come back with some numbers and said, well, this money is going to be used for this. There was a lot of duplication, which I brought out in the hearing in April. But last but not least, there were 80 to 90% of some of the transactions that there were no receipts for. There was nothing but a line item that said this is what we used it for. So we want a forensic audit. And unfortunately, along party lines, that was turned down Wednesday.
Where did you see some of the duplication? Because I know you're somebody with a little bit of a background in finance yourself.
Well, there was just a kind of a one-page sheet that they gave us. Oh, here's what we have. Specifically, and we don't want to get too far in the weeds, but specifically, the Office of the President came back and said, listen, this money, let's say use a number, $10 million is going to be used for mitigating greenhouse gas emissions. And then you flip over and there's another $7.5 million for, a very similar phrase, something like, environmental greenhouse mitigation, and so you look at those and you say, well, aren't they basically the same thing? And we didn't get a good, clear answer on that. And that's of what they actually had answers for. Okay. Keep in mind, there was a lot that they didn't have answers for. Look, we just want answers. I'm not saying there's anything nefarious. As a matter of fact, the state auditor said she didn't see anything nefarious. But when I asked her specifically in the hearing, can you rule it out? The answer was no, because we don't have the receipts. So it's like going in for an audit, and your tax audit, and then they say, where's the receipts for this deduction you took? And you said, I don't have it. What would happen? You'd pay the taxes and fines and penalties and maybe more. That's all we want to know is the facts for the taxpayers.
And I'm always interested to talk to policymakers and legislators like yourself after they've been working on the local level at City Council, and then you went to the Assembly. Where are some of the differences on the legislative process, and how different is that?
Well, briefly, I know we were on a time crunch, but it's amazing. Here you get a call and say, I'm having trouble getting an oak tree permit. It's about to fall on my house. I pick up the phone, I call the right people, and the next day there's the arborist out there from the city, and they're arborists, and they write a permit. Go, yeah, you're right, it's going to fall on the house. Here you go, you're done. And the answer in the State House is write a bill.
Yeah.
And then it takes forever, or it doesn't get done at all.
Gotcha. So the speed at which things move was a little different.
Quite a bit different.
Okay.
The closest the government is to the people, the better.